Fellowship of Northfield. My name is Mary Dorr, and I'm proud to have been a member of this community for 19 years now. We're coming on. Can't hardly believe it. We're honored to have Reverend Meg Riley with us today as our guest presenter. I will share a full introduction in a bit, but for now, welcome Reverend Riley. UUFN is an inclusive community that nurtures spiritual and intellectual growth and fosters ethical and social responsibility. If you are a visitor, either on site or online, we are glad you are with us, and we invite you to stay after the service to get acquainted. We welcome your questions, and we look forward to getting to know you. Later in the service, we will take our Share the Plate offering as a way to care for the wider world. For this month, we celebrate the value of pluralism. Our Share the Plate recipient is Interfaith America. Interfaith America exists to realize the positive potential of our religiously diverse democracy. They recognize the religious diversity in our nation can descend into dangerous conflict or can be engaged in a spirit of respect, relationship, and cooperation. During the offering later, you may put cash or check into the basket or donate online from our website, uunorthfield.org. If your check is for pledge, simply write pledge in the memo line. There will also be instructions on the screen during the offertory time. Let me call your attention to the announcements in your order of service and weekly email. There you'll find more information about the following. We'll have a spring appetizer and salad supper this Friday night, May 10th, and all are invited. Child dedications will be held, you still hearing me? Okay. Child dedications will be held during the service on May 19th. Parents, please sign up by May 12th. In RE today, we're going to discuss and learn about pluralism and make May Day baskets UU style. Oh gosh, here you go, tiny little paper. This lesson to begin exploring one of the distinct messages of our faith that gives us about how to be in a pluralistic faith. And finally, please note that the garden team for the spring cleanup day is meeting on Tuesday, May 7th at 9:30 a.m. Wednesday, May 8th is the rain date. Now, I've noted that many days this week it's going to be rainy, so we'll just do our best, dress appropriately. Join us Sunday for Practicing Pluralism, Reverend Sarah Smalley. There are many ways to kneel and kiss the ground, says the Sufi poet Rumi. Join Reverend Sarah as we consider the role of spiritual practice in our lives, not just common ones like meditation and prayer, but the many ways we can more closely pay attention to our lives and how they can be used to break the patterns of oppression. Again, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northfield. Our opening words are from Tess Baumberger. This place would be less beautiful without you. Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Jew, Hindu, humanist, and earth-centered too. This place would be less beautiful without you. Your heart honed by hardship, grief, illness, seeking solace and comfort here among us. This place would be less beautiful without you, filled with joy and gratitude, seeking celebration of life's bounty. This place would be less beautiful without you, striving to resist a world that tells us we are so much less than we can truly be. This place would be less beautiful without each of us, born here in this morning to seek heaven, heaven's fire, in each other's souls, our own flames rising to meet. Come, let us worship together. The flaming chalice is our symbol of the Unitarian Universalism. Each Sunday when we gather, we bring this light, this symbol of life together. Please join me in speaking the words for the lighting of the chalice. Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to learn what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. Please rise in body and or spirit for our opening hymn. Come sing a song with me, number 346.
Sing a song with me. Come sing
I invite you to allow yourself an unhurried breath. Relax your shoulders, inhale and exhale, and let your heart catch up with you in this moment. Rest in the embrace of a wider love. In the presence of this love that holds us all, we use our chalice to flame to the light our candles. We use our chalice to light the flame of our candles of community. We light our first candle. Do you want to do that? As a blessing for the wider world, holding in our hearts those who are bearing the brunt of climate changes and the relentless onslaught. From those facing tornadoes and floods to those in areas where droughts threaten food security, we know that we all must be part of the collective efforts towards a sustainable future for all. We know too that the details of our daily lives are sacred and important. We now light a candle for all the simple joys that are sustaining us. In honor of the joys and sorrows we carry in our hearts, but that have not been spoken aloud. And we move into a time of silence. May the truth of your heart be reflected in these flames. Amen, and blessed be. We will now take our offering. Our offering is one way we make our care for the world tangible. This month, our Share the Plate recipient is Interfaith America. You may donate by cash, check made out to UUFN with offering basket in the memo line, or online from our website. The website is uunorthfield.org. You can scroll down to the bottom of the homepage for that link. We now gratefully accept the offering. Reverend Meg Riley, a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, was raised in congregations in Charleston, West Virginia, and Akron, Ohio. After serving for 38 years as a religious professional in a variety of capacities, Reverend Riley retired in the summer of 2020. She now serves with Charles Dumond as co-moderator of the Unitarian Universalist Association. She lives in Minneapolis, nestled in with her family, animals, gardens, deep friendships, and vibrant activist community. She is also the editor of Testimony, the Transformational Power of Unitarian Universalism, and Shelter in Place, which is one of my favorites. I welcome Reverend Riley.
Good morning. I have to tell you how excited I am to see your new place and all of you. And, you know, it's a time when a lot of congregations feel small and worry about the future. And it's so wonderful to see people so excited about the addition you're going to put on the building and what you're going to do together. And so I carry you away as hope where hope can be hard to find. So thank you for that. It's really terrific to see that. So I want to acknowledge my colleague, Laura Cowton, who snuck in and is sitting in the back. She's one of the ministers at Unity Church, Unitarian in St. Paul, who might have thought she'd be incognito today. About a year ago, I was in Germany with the European Unitarian Universalists as their keynote speaker. In my talk, I shared an observation that James Luther Adams, probably the most revered Unitarian theologian of the last century, made in one of his books. He had been to Germany as Nazism was beginning to take hold, and he observed that the way that the Nazis tended to like to practice religion was very similar to what he had observed back home in the US in Unitarian churches, a form of religious naturalism, nature-based, not really talking about the good and evil of humanity. After my talk, one of the German ministers present told me something I didn't know. He said he was glad I had mentioned this observation from Adams because, in fact, after World War II, a group of Nazis had taken over one of the Unitarian churches in Germany and stayed there until the 1980s. Not former Nazis, not repentant Nazis, Nazis looking for a religious home. They looked at the Unitarian Church and saw there was nothing to keep them out. And so they stayed and dominated that congregation with Nazi philosophies until finally in the 1980s, courageous people who had had enough banded together and expelled them. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. When I was senior minister at the Church of the Larger Fellowship, I heard from Unitarian Universalists all over the world about all kinds of things they were doing. One month I heard from 3 small fellowships in the US and Mexico, all with under 20 members. Each of these congregations was struggling to figure out what to do with the fact that they had been taken over by people who seemed normal enough when they came in, but now that they were in charge of the board, they were asserting their belief that beings from Uranus, the planet Uranus, were already on Earth and were going to, in fact, save the world. These people were calling me for help because this was not what they wanted to hear about on Sunday mornings. All of us are sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. And it's important to remember that as this value is currently proposed as part of the revision of Article 2, it's one of 6 values which is interconnected with the others. It is a value that needs context. Although not in the dramatic ways I've just described, pluralism has always brought tension and disagreement into our faith. Originally, both Unitarianism and Universalism were solidly grounded in Christian identity, Christian scripture, Christian worship. Pretty soon, though, people like the Transcendentalists, almost 100 years ago, began looking at Eastern religions and seeing what was holy and truthful there. This was not met with widespread appreciation at first. It probably seemed as alien as beings from the planet Uranus to a lot of the people who were Unitarians. But gradually, it became part of the tapestry of our faith. And indeed, having a Buddhist bell at the beginning of worship is not something you'll go home and post on Facebook about. It's just kind of how we are. In 1933, a group of Unitarians and Jews and leaders in the ethical society movement published a humanist manifesto saying that religions the world over are under the necessity of coming to terms with new conditions created by a vastly increased knowledge and experience. Today, man's larger understanding of the universe, his scientific achievements, and deeper appreciation of brotherhood have created a situation which requires a new statement of the means and purposes of religion. That kind of humanism was the Unitarian Universalism in which I was raised. The male language stands out so much to us now, but it didn't then. The faith has changed so much in my lifetime. When Unitarians and Universalists merged in 1961, they hammered out an initial sense of principles in order for both groups to feel safe enough to merge. Part of the bylaws that they developed stated that they would be periodically revisited because we are a living tradition. Like the humanists, they and we would agree that religions the world over are constantly coming to terms with new conditions. One of these changes, of course, was the entrance of huge numbers of women into religious leadership, and specifically ministry. I still remember the first time I heard a woman preach. I didn't know it was possible. And if you can see it, you can be it, as Billie Jean King always says. But, you know, it used to just be absolutely normative that ministers were men. And now I'm reckoning none of you are going to go home and write on Facebook that a woman preached at your church today, since Reverend Sarah is here all the time. And changes continue as more and more gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people are ordained. Black, indigenous, people of color are ordained. The only thing constant is change, it would seem, individually and collectively, in the wider world and in our living tradition. I don't know if it's true for you, but my personal spiritual journey and practice has taken me through a number of identities and metaphors and practices. I've had times centered in earth-based practices and holidays, and then I went to seminary and learned a lot about Christianity and learned that it wasn't all the fundamentalism that surrounded me in West Virginia as a small child. I spent time when I lived in Washington, D.C. and really needed to find ways to stay in my heart, practicing Buddhist meditation deeply, specifically metta meditation, doing all of this without leaving my birthright Unitarian Universalist faith. Like many of you, I reckon my faith is now an amalgam of practices and languages, and I'm just one person. Broaden that into our families, our congregations, and there are many languages being spoken, many spiritual journeys taking place. The trick is how to do this ethically in a grounded way, respectfully, as individuals and as communities. When I describe my journey, I may sound like a dilettante, like someone who doesn't go deep or take any of those identities seriously. People make fun of Unitarian Universalism for this. I remember being hurt when I was reading Barack Obama's book. I was excited to have learned that he grew up as part of a UU congregation in Hawaii. He dismissed us quickly, saying he didn't think you should choose your religious beliefs like you choose food in a cafeteria. He made us sound silly. He hurt my feelings. My own kid can torment me by saying UUism isn't a real religion for similar reasons. Or how about when Stephen Colbert said, Unitarian Universalism is the only religion where free to be you and me is a holy scripture. We resemble that, and yet I know from interacting over many years with Unitarian Universalists that we're not dilettantes, that we practice very seriously, actually a very difficult faith. living in a pluralistic community. I've been living in different iterations of this faith, amazingly, for more than 2/3 of a century now. And I think the respect for pluralism is a profound religious, spiritual practice in and of itself. Other people with my story would leave one community and go to another, joining a coven for a while, a Christian church for a while, a Buddhist Sangha, where they would be surrounded by other people who used the same language, had the same practice, developed the same beliefs. And yet in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we're always going to be in this stirring mix of people who think very differently than we do. And living there is a spiritual practice, I think. I think it's an improvisational practice where we have to be centered in who we are in order to not be threatened by where other people are, to know that our own story is true for us, so that if someone has a different story, it's not taking something from us. Like many who grew up Unitarian Universalists, I visited all kinds of places in a curriculum called the Church Across the Street, which is now called Neighboring Faiths. And when I Googled it to make sure it still had that same name, I saw that a bunch of congregations have adapted the name and call it Building Bridges, Crossing Paths, Honoring Our Neighbors. Of course they adapted it. We're an adaptive faith. We're a community of adapters. Staying in a spiritual community of diverse journeyers and adapting is essential to our collective practice and my individual practice. I am one who does not believe that you can be a Unitarian Universalist by yourself. I believe that it is inherently a relational faith. I will insert here something that I find myself needing to clarify constantly with Unitarian Universalists as we consider revising the principles and creating a new covenant. This is not an individual statement of faith. The principles are not that, the covenant is not that. We don't need to say, this fits me like a glove. That's exactly who I am. This is a covenant between congregations, a congregational agreement. And I know that individual congregations will adapt it just as they adapt curriculum and everything else, and that individuals within congregations will do as we always do. Whatever the UUA's bylaws say, people will take what you need and leave the rest. Staying together in a community where not everyone uses the same religious language or engages in the same religious practices means that we have to develop spiritual maturity. Not every worship service, not every class, not every experience will be what we personally love most. In fact, we might really dislike some of them. Moving from being an individualistic consumer, writing an invisible Yelp review of each service and how it meets our needs, into being members of a community, thinking about everyone, means that we trust that others in the room will be getting something at times that we're not. Years ago, I developed curriculum for leaders, one of the jobs that I had. And afterwards, we would evaluate with participants how various parts of any given curriculum touched them. Invariably, someone would hate what someone else said made the whole thing worth it. Invariably, the different learning styles, the different experiences, what people brought into the room dramatically shaped what they needed and what they received. We had to begin to assume that if we balanced out raves, and loathing, we were doing okay. If pretty much everyone disliked something, we'd take it out. The same was true when I was at the Church of the Larger Fellowship and we would send out the newsletter, Quest. We always heard complaints from people who said that it wasn't what they wanted. As long as the complaints pretty well balanced out, we thought we were doing okay. My father was a devoted UU all his life, and a self-named curmudgeon, a name I would not disagree with. He absolutely hated the changes in worship services, just beginning with the word worship, in his church over the decades. But he loved his church. He hated lighting candles. He hated anything resembling prayer. He hated pretty much everything but sermons. Ideally, very intellectual sermons. Ideally, the kinds of sermons that drove Ralph Waldo Emerson to talk about corpse cold Unitarian preachers. Those were his very favorite. But he also loved the people. He loved the people. He absolutely loved them, and they loved him, old curmudgeon that he was. He lived for 10 years after my mother died, and the church provided the emotional center of his life. He and I argued about virtually everything church-related, except that we both loved the people and we loved the faith of Unitarian Universalism. You know, it made me think about years ago, my family was on vacation together, the extended generations, and it came up that we all love the Beatles. So we're talking about how much we love the Beatles, and then we said, well, let's go around the table and hear everybody's favorite album and what you loved about it. And as we went around the table, it became very clear that while we all said we loved the Beatles, we loved really different bands. Some of the people loved Paul McCartney's melodies, where there was a distinct melody or love songs. Some of the people, especially my niece and nephew who'd grown up with punk, they really liked John Lennon's like angry, you know, kind of music. Some of the people loved the early rock and roll of the Beatles. And so we all sat and said, yeah, we love the Beatles, but when we broke it down, we would make very different playlists of the Beatles, right? And so we can't expect to go to a congregation and hear our own playlist every week. We're not going to, because there are so many people here who might love what we don't. For as long as I can remember, there's been a particular tension between certain theists and certain atheists in our congregations. I don't think the tension comes from the different beliefs, because I also know many atheists and theists that get along with each other just fine. I think tension is caused when there is lack of what the Pluralism Covenant calls us to do: embrace our differences with love and curiosity and respect. I have heard both atheists and theists speak of each other with an absolute lack of those qualities over the years. The Gottman Institute, which has studied marriage and partnership for decades, considers contempt to be the most poisonous quality in any relationship. They say treating others with disrespect and mocking them with sarcasm and condescension are forms of contempt. So are hostile humor, name-calling, mimicking, and body language, such as eye-rolling and sneering. In whatever form, contempt is poisonous to a relationship because it conveys disgust and superiority, especially moral, ethical, or I'm going to try to say this word, characterological. Aside from that last word, which I can barely pronounce, which means about your character. It's saying your character is basically disgusting. I think most of us learned the truth of that in about the 4th grade, right? We didn't like to be treated that way. We avoided people who treated us that way. The Gottmans are researching marriage, but dozens of political scientists have documented how contempt destroys democracy. When you're no longer able to have a civil and respectful conversation with others around you, something essential is already lost. I believe contempt is destructive in any community. Social media makes mockery, sarcasm, and condescension as easy as pushing a button. And trust me, I feel in every cell the truth of Lily Tomlin's character, the punk rocker, Agnes Angst, when she says, no matter how much contempt I have for society, it is nothing compared to the contempt society has for me. I understand the desire to wield contempt, to keep the pain away of what is put on us. And yet spiritual maturity demands that we find another way. Contempt kills. Contempt, cynicism, sarcasm, all the other tools we might employ to push away the deep pain of feeling alone or feeling hurt by other people's beliefs or marginalized, those responses are going to put more poison into the world. Now, I know we're all human, and with our nearest and dearest, we're going to need to be snarky because there's some weird stuff going on. I mean, really. But in public, part of our faith, I believe, is manifesting a different way in community. It's vitally important that we employ love and respect and curiosity for each other. Now, there are limits to this. I began this talk with the descriptions of Nazis and fans of Uranus taking over our congregations. I think it's important that we have clear boundaries in our congregations that are grounded not just in pluralism, but all the other values lifted up in the principles or the covenant. We need to have boundaries, but we don't need to enforce them with poison. And sometimes we really, really want to enforce them with poison. I'm speaking for myself. I've been reading a book called The Opposite of Hate by a woman named Sally Cohn, who's a commentator on CNN. And she got interested and curious about the trolls who said very hateful things to her about her commentary, because before she went to CNN, she was on Fox News as a liberal commentator. And so she tried to meet with people and actually talk to them. And she ended up saying the opposite of hate isn't love, it's connection. That if you can actually talk to people, they may have said really hateful things to you online, but when you connect, not that they get loving, this is not la-di-da, kumbaya here. Not that they suddenly say, oh, you're brilliant, what was I missing? But that they say, we're human, we have humanity together. And in this time that we're in now, I feel like shared humanity is getting a little risky. I don't know about you, but I'm watching and I think, is there a bottom? Are we gonna hit bottom? Is anything gonna say, oh no, we've gone too far? And so I think a spiritual response, as difficult as it is to remain curious and loving and respectful, not of beliefs, but of the worth of people, not the worth of every belief, not the worth of everything that's said, absolutely not. We need to be clear about that. But we can also be clear about where we are and who we are and stay centered there and not need to try to, have you ever changed anyone? Have you ever felt changed by anyone who treated you with contempt? I'll ask you, for me, I get a little reptile brain when people are contemptuous to me. It does not open up my best self. Just realized I sent myself the wrong version of the sermon, which is why I'm now just trying to remember what I had written. Hold on 1 second, let me just center. Well, I know what I ended up with. I wanted to talk about gratitude for what this practice can do for us and what growing up in this practice has done for me. It's allowed me to experiment in my own journey without feeling like I'm betraying myself by changing. It's taught me the value of improvisation and of adaptation and of listening to people around me for guidance. I think that relationship is getting really lost right now in our culture as we're on devices rather than in rooms. So when I hear about things like your supper, I'm just like, yay, we need more of that. We need more human connection to remind us that we have bodies, that we have hearts, that we're in it. So I feel like I've gotten tremendous gratitude. I've also, as the faith has evolved, and all of a sudden I've gone from the cutting edge to like, the side. As an older person, that's what we do. And suddenly, our mission is to support those coming along, right? Our mission is no longer to be the center, but to support the center. And I think having my own journey gives me the strength to do that. I feel really sad when I see people who aren't able to just say, to everything there is a season, and it's my season to kind of step aside and let new leadership come in. I think that pluralism teaches that you say, oh, people know things now that I never learned. They learned it when they were kids. I didn't. Isn't that cool? What are they going to teach me? It's taught me over and over to see myself again, to see how I hold identities in the world, that I might not even be aware of. So I go to Europe, and all of a sudden, I'm so American. I'm just so American. And they're telling me all the ways that I am so American. But if I'm not out of, fish can't see water. If I'm not out of that context, I'll just think this is who people are, right? And so the more context that we can be in, the more that we can listen to people who say, but the way that you use language isn't the way that my culture uses language. Or, the way that you have had family history is not the way that my family has had history. That doesn't solve our problems. But as we're in right now, really, in my friendship group, really difficult conversations, for instance, about what's going on in the Middle East. My friends don't agree about this. My Jewish friends don't agree about this. I mean, nobody, right? I've learned to listen. Like, I don't have to know what to do. President Biden is not calling me on the phone to ask me what we should do. What I need to do is listen and stay in loving, curious, respectful relationship with people who have different points of view right now, because Unitarian Universalists have different points of view right now. So I need to hear them all. And so it's a beautiful practice, I think. And anyone who thinks it's just easy breezy, I think hasn't tried it. So I just want to end with great gratitude for having been raised in this faith. It's held me all this time. I'm so grateful, you know, for a song that we sing, and I think of all the times I've sung it over the years. I know in this room, as in every congregation, there are chairs where people used to be here and they've died, but they're still here with us. You know, I love that about spiritual community. And I even love that it's kind of out of favor right now, you know, because it is. And that's why so many of our congregations are struggling, because a whole lot of people are going to Comic-Con or, you know, somewhere else. They're finding community elsewhere. So I feel like hearing about a vital, ongoing community like this to draw people in when we're in such a lonely time, and then listening to who they are and what they bring and how they transform the group that's already here is exactly our practice. So thank you.
Please rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn, We Would Be One, 318. We do have enough time, we could take a few questions. Is that microphone possibly handy, Paul? Meg is happy to field any thoughts or questions you might have had pop into your mind.
Mic test. We got a mic. We have Mr. Top, who has a question.
I enjoyed your story about Germany a great deal. And I just had a question as I listened. Garrison Keeler made fun of us for years and hurt my feelings deeply. And I was talking to one of our members, I suppose 20 years ago. We were working on a project, and I said to him, I thought about this a while, I said, well, you know, we would not accept Adolf Hitler as one of our members because it's not possible that he would respect the worth and dignity of other people. So I'm curious, in listening to your story, when was that principle adapted or adopted? There's a conundrum for me because I don't understand how Nazis could manage to have a Unitarian church.
You're sitting next to someone who knows a ton more about this than I do. Laura lived in Europe for many years.
Good morning. The story of the German Unitarians it's on their website. They've written a couple of apologetic letters to the world, and they still have protesters outside of their gatherings because of their Nazi history. What is true of Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists and free religious people around the world outside of North America, we'll include Canada as part of North America for argument's sake, do not have the principles and purposes. They were not part of the Unitarian Universalist Association that adopted the principles and purposes. The German Unitarians actually predate the UUA, and they're a different organized body.
I just want to respond that it was so important to me because the person I was talking to said, "Oh, thank you. Thank you. I didn't think you stood for anything."
That's pluralism gone wrong when people think that, right? You can be curious and loving and respectful and still have, strong ethical center and commitments. And as another colleague, Meg Barnhouse, likes to say, just try announcing in coffee hour that you don't care about recycling and see how accepting and loving and curious your congregation is, right? I mean, we practice a faithfulness to the common good. That's pretty much what all of our hymns are about. That's the center of our faith. And so people who aren't committed to that mostly just aren't going to find a good welcome here. In the case of Germany, I think it was some disenfranchised people looking for a place they could be without getting sent away because so many places were just outright saying, no, get out of here, you can't be here. And they saw that the Unitarians at that time had no provision for ever telling anyone to leave, and they liked that. Oh, go on. Yes, good fit. Yeah. And so, yeah, I love James Luther Adams' question that he asked, like, how would someone visiting your congregation, and he was asking about Germany, we ask the same thing now, know that you oppose Nazism and the beliefs of Nazism? What would tell them that? I think in most of our congregations these days, it's not subtle. There are things out on the building that kind of declare who we are and get defaced and stolen and all kinds of things because of that. But at the time, he was saying, a lot of our congregations, there's nothing that would tell anyone. So it's something really to think about as a congregation.
Yeah, first off, I'd just like to thank you for your talk. You hit upon a lot of the issues that I think is very appropriate for today's world. And you mentioned that you appreciate our congregation that's growing, which in that I just want to make a statement that I believe a lot of UUs are growing because of the climate of the world right now. Like you mentioned, we have the media that we can connect with people around the world. And so we have access to many different beliefs and many different cultures. And people are seeking that truth and a broader perspective. And while many traditional religions are losing members because if they're not appropriate or, well, that's not the correct word, not pertinent to today's world, I think we are growing because we hold the values that most people have regardless of what religion they belong to.
Well, I would love to just say, yeah, that's happening. But what's true is COVID really wiped out a lot of our congregations. A lot of them are struggling financially, are struggling with attendance, are struggling to move on. And I have a good friend who's walking from Maine to the West Coast, so I've been looking at all our congregations in New England, because it's colder than she thought, to find people who would put her up for a night, which has been great. I mean, I've met amazing people doing it. But you get to central Massachusetts, And there are all these buildings, and then you look at their website, they have 11 people left, they have 9 people left, they have 20. So they have buildings, and some of them, bless them, still have services, but they don't have people. And that's not about us. When you go to New England and drive around, you see that a ton of church buildings of all kinds are now theaters, condos, all kinds of other things, because Americans, if you look at the numbers, are just dropping off of all churches. We're not doing nearly as badly as a lot of people. But I wish that I could say, I remember when my kid was little and learned that the Catholics didn't ordain women and said, and that's why there aren't very many of them, right? It's like, yeah, not quite. I wish that was robustly true. But what I see is some congregations really are growing and thriving, and some of them who haven't adapted to the time really are on hospice care at this point. So it's a mixed bag. If you look at the overall numbers, it's not terrible, but congregation by congregation, I just got heartbroken trying to find someone in central Massachusetts, because I've been around long enough that I remember when those were strong, vital congregations. And so, there's gains and losses, but it's just really, that's why it's so great to see people, thinking about a new expansion on the building and not being like, oh, who do we have to lay off right now? Because there's a lot of that going on. Sorry. I'd like to be the bearer of only good news, but try to be honest.
I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah.
The reality.
Yeah, it's just, like I said, it's countercultural to go to church at all now, right? Which I'm hoping could be a draw for us, because we've always been a countercultural religion, so it could be a fit. And so being super welcoming to people who are new, hearing their stories, letting their stories in and not expecting them to adapt what's always happened, those are key components to the growing congregations. And there's also just, I'll say this as a boomer, there's just a sad financial reality of who has resources and who doesn't right now. And that's part of the economic struggle, is that a lot of the people coming in are barely getting by, even if they're in 2-income households. And so some of the wealth that the boomers, and I understand there's been some real generosity here, and I just, again, want to appreciate that, because those of us who, I came through, I got scholarships to seminary, I didn't come out with student debt, all those things have made my life possible in a way that I see younger colleagues who are going to die with student loans. And so it's just important that we keep the wider context that we are part of, always as part of us, and forgive student loans too, but anyway, thank you. I really appreciate being here. I'll tell Sarah how much fun I had. She's in Hanska today on a pulpit exchange, so yeah.
Thank you so much.
I just want to add one announcement that I didn't say earlier. After the service on Sunday, May 12th, and following a stewardship update, there will be a Q&A session on the proposed budget for 2024, 2025. Maybe not. Oh, this is a hot off the press and then not off the press.
That's just, we were thinking about that, but because it's Mother's Day, and a lot of people will want to be with their moms, or be moms. So, we just want to make sure that there's opportunity. We will have an opportunity to talk about the budget before our annual meeting in June. So.
Okay, never mind. Duly noted. Thanks, Paul. Okay. For our closing benediction today, we share the words written by Reverend Israel Bufardi. Know that deep down, our hearts beat in one universal rhythm. We join together in the words for extinguishing our chalice. I'm making you work a lot. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, and fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please rise and body your spirit, and with your hands over your heart, holding a hand of those next to you, or whatever posture is most convenient and comfortable. Let us sing the words of blessing to one another. Go in peace. Go in peace.